Hello and welcome to our first Circles Big View Night. My name is Sarah Rampton and I am one of the executive directors here at 6-8, and I have the privilege of being one of the coaches for our circle leaders and allies here at 6-8 Circles Sauk Prairie. In case you're not familiar with Circles involves individuals who we call circle leaders, and they are brave individuals for sure who choose to do the hard work of working themselves out of poverty. They are trained and certified as leaders through a 12 to 16 week process, and then paired with allies, and they work until financial stability is reached. And that is an average of about 18 months to 2 years. So they are in this for the long haul, our leaders and allies, and we are so proud of them and so excited that you have joined us tonight to honor them and to begin this discussion of how our community can come together to help all of us move forward. So it is my privilege to introduce, these are our leaders and allies here. You guys can wave to everybody. We gather on Monday evenings, and so we are excited that you are here with us tonight. It is my privilege to introduce to you Chad Harnish. He is on our Big View planning team, and he will be presenting to us tonight about bootstraps and benefits. So welcome, Chad. Thanks for being here. And the rest of you, we'd encourage you to keep yourself muted at this point, and we will go from there.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to finally give this presentation. I originally planned to give it on March 16th, so we're only 8 months late, which is uncommon in my life to be so far delinquent. We're going to talk tonight about the idea of bootstraps and benefits, and really that's a memorable phrase to help us understand and to recognize that in American society we're divided between right and left frequently. Bootstraps and benefits recognizes that depending on that orientation, you may have a different way to think about poverty. You have a different understanding of poverty, and you have a different thought about what a solution to poverty looks like. But inside circles, bootstraps and benefits can come together to work towards the common goal of ending poverty in our time, while still utilizing and staying true to the ideals and principles of your own philosophical mindset. So we're going to talk a little bit about that dichotomy and how we can have that work together to help solve this problem in our community. So to do that, we just need to understand and recognize what Circles is. It's a nationwide program that provides opportunities for people to come together across socioeconomic lines, volunteer, support families in moving out of poverty permanently, while together they learn about the conditions that hold families back. And that's what the Big View team is. It's looking at those systemic conditions that act as obstacles for people moving out of poverty, and how do we work collaboratively to end those obstacles, or move those obstacles, or remove those obstacles. So one of the things we want to talk about tonight is the idea of divergent and convergent thinking. Pardon me while I check my notes. So in divergent and convergent thinking, it's the coming together of thoughts or splitting apart of thoughts. Divergent thinking is the creative process. It's thinking of new ways of looking at things. Convergent thinking is bringing things together to solve problems and to think in an orderly fashion. Both are important in the creative process. Both are important in our world and in society, right? Convergent, if you think about tectonic plates move together and pull apart, creating beautiful mountain ranges, but they also create volcanoes. And that can happen in any group that is working together. Divergent and convergent thinking can act in concert with each other to make great outcomes, or they can tear an organization apart if they're not used thoughtfully. So in Circles, we want to make sure that we're thinking about how can we be divergent to solve problems, and then convergent to put those problems and solutions into action. If you think about the ways, here, one example of how we use divergent and convergent thinking in the same situation is, let's say that you sat down to reorganize your closet. When you're taking everything out of the closet, you're using divergent thinking, and you're thinking about new ways to organize that, and that there's a point when you've emptied out your closet where you have to transition to putting all that stuff back. As you're taking it out, you can be as disruptive and as destructive as you want to be to the organization of the closet. But once you have to put it back in, then you have to be convergent in your thinking, because you have to be able to organize the closet in a way that you can find things again. So one of the things we just want you to think about is applying that idea of divergent and convergent thinking, and how those are both important thought processes. How can we use and think about the ways that we do divergent and convergent thinking as a group, especially in this group, especially around thinking about how do we solve poverty, right? So thinking of a situation where you use divergent and or convergent thinking, what challenges might you foresee if some individuals in a group want to focus on an idea generating while other people are thinking about idea analysis? And then what role does trust play in the ability of a group to flexibly move from one kind of thinking to another kind of thinking? We'll just give you a minute to sort of reflect on that, either at home individually or in the room. So 1 minute. We will come back together. I believe in the room I've switched to a different slide, but we'll draw attention to Albert Einstein's thought at the bottom of this slide, that solving problems is impossible if we keep using the same thinking that we use to get into the problem. And that, I think, is part of what we're going to talk about next. So it sometimes feels like we're going in circles as we try to solve complex, intractable problems like poverty and systemic poverty, right? And often it's because those of us who are bootstraps people and those of us who are benefits people are, so I'm being reminded that those of you who are joining us on Google Meet can certainly type in your questions, and our team will use those questions to sort of broaden the conversation tonight. So those of us in our society, when we're faced with a problem, we approach it from the bootstraps and the benefits, right? Bootstraps, limited role in growth of government. What can individuals do to improve their circumstances? Humanity's hardwired for misbehavior. Trouble comes within, and we have to find a way to overcome that individually. Benefits are inclined to focus on what society can do to improve things. Expanded role of and growth of government. What can society do to improve circumstances for groups of people? Humanity's hardwired for good. Trouble comes from without. And often, those two groups spend so much time fighting with each other that they can't ever come to a solution on a problem. Inside Circles, at least in Circles Sauk Prairie, we want to do everything we can to reject that dichotomy. We want to, we want to be able to take the strengths of bootstraps and the strengths of benefits. So the strength of bootstraps, right, are autonomy, liberty, responsibility, freedom, individuality. And we want to take the strengths of benefits thinkers, fairness, equity, community, society, and universality. And what we really want to do is an idea that comes from Jim Collins, and we want to reject the tyranny of or. We don't have to solve this problem by bootstraps or benefits. We can solve this problem by bootstraps and benefits, right? Organizations that get rid of the tyranny of or thinking, like it's either this or that. If you get rid of that thinking and embrace the genius of and, we can do both. And if we do both, we can really start to solve problems. I lead a school, and the genius of and is the number one thing that we talk about when we're trying to solve problems in my school. I would love to see us apply that across the board inside Circles, because that's what's going to help us come to unique actually implementable solutions that won't lead to cross the aisle finger pointing. So as we do that, though, we have to have some common commitments to each other. So those of us who are working inside Circles, who are both Bootstraps and benefits, we need to agree that we are not going to agree on everything to get something done. We need a framework of understanding and shared end games. We need to understand that if we want to argue, there is no shortage of people and platforms for making allegations and assumptions. I think we can all go find a place to argue if that's what we really want to do. Inside Circles, though, we're not going to do that. It's not a place to argue. And some people may prefer the tooth wiggling nature of fault finding, right? The idea that I've got a loose tooth, and if I just wiggle it enough, that pain of wiggling that tooth is somehow stimulating, but it doesn't really solve any problems. We're gonna let go of that, and we're not gonna fault find, and we're not gonna point fingers, and we're gonna say, "Yep, I'm who I am, and you're who you are," and we're gonna come and we're gonna work on this problem in the middle from both our perspectives to solve that. So to do that, a big part of building trust, a big part of a shared group like this comes to a point where they can work from both directions and still solve problems, is that they have to have some shared norms. They have to have some shared agreements about how they're going to work on things. So one of the things, you can see this list, is that we're going to define language and terms. We're going to have a shared end game with quantifiable objectives. We're going to measure those outcomes to make sure that we're making progress toward them over time. If we have to, we'll adapt our process to achieve our end games, and we'll measure the outcomes again, and then we'll adapt the process again. And we'll keep doing that until we solve this problem locally. And when everything else comes down to it, we're going to work on action steps. We're going to identify specific things that we can do. We're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And we're going to avoid arranging around factions. We're going to avoid splitting off into finger pointing. Bill Parcells, those of you who might know football, gave one of the greatest Hall of Fame speeches I've ever heard, when he said that the teams I've been a part of that are winning teams gather in the locker room after games and talk collectively about what they could have done better. Losing teams gather in cells and individuals in the locker room and talk about what other parts of the team screwed up to cost them to have the game get lost. So we need to have a champion mindset and come together when there are problems and talk about how we can collectively solve them versus splitting off into cells. I didn't quite quote Bill Parcells exactly there. Let's say it was a paraphrase. So to do that, we want to focus on SMART goals. SMART goals is a proven strategy to help hold groups accountable, setting goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It keeps us on track to help us solve and make sure that we're being able to monitor what we're doing. So we can disagree. It's not about poverty management. It's about Mary and John's goals. So Mary and John are stand-ins here for our circle leaders. Circle leaders have been meeting now for nearly a year, if I believe that to be true. I know there's been some interruptions with COVID. And this is our first Circles Big View group. But our circle leaders will be the critical part of establishing what's the end game and what are the things that what are the obstacles that we need help removing to make sure that long-term growth out of poverty is possible. So going back to defining our end game, in Circles, the end game is increase household earned income towards 200% of the federal poverty guideline, and at the same time, reduce poverty rates by 10% in our self-designated geographical circles areas. It's a quantifiable outcome that we use to measure our movement, and this is the thing that we'll adapt our processes around over time. Why do we do this? 200% is twice the earned income of a poverty guideline suggests, and it's a starting point for understanding what is required for a family to have sustainable resources. It represents what most people need to be self-sufficient, depending on region. The math is simplified to make it to consider hourly rates and monthly income needed. And then having a 200% end game will cause us to focus on activities on Mary's and John's goals for increased earned income rather than on our own agendas. What do our circle leaders need to increase their income? And that allows us to let go of our own agendas. We're focused on their income. It's really easy, and it's not easy to do, but it's easy to measure, and it gives us a place to start. Why 10% of the poverty rate? 10% is considered a threshold, a minimal threshold for being all in on any kind of activity or action goal. Anything less isn't a goal, it's a hobby. Anything more is not a goal, it's a wish. Saying we want to reduce poverty by 100% is easier than actually reducing poverty by 10%. Using 10% makes for simple math, focuses our actions in a specific and measurable goal. Having a 10% end game will cause us to consider encircling a smaller geographic area to demonstrate results. So for us, we've elected our geographic area is the boundary of the Sauk Prairie School District. It's on the map for you there in case you didn't know that little part down there in the southeast is still there. It's just a little bitty peninsula of Sauk Prairie goodness stuck into further Greater Dane County. But it's us. And that's the goal. That's the area that we're looking at. And what does it mean inside that geographic area to increase household income by 200% for 10% of our poverty, right? So we had 3,571 in December of 2018 when we started this Circles journey. So using that baseline data, we need at least 357 people to come above 200% of the federal poverty level for us to be successful by December of 2028. Looking forward to it. It's just around the corner. We're on our way. Maybe we'll be meeting in person by then. So moving into some of the final things for us to think about as the Circles Big View team is that we're not in this to compromise and we're not in this to negotiate. We don't want anybody to come to this, either whether you're a bootstraps or a benefits type thinker. We don't want you to come into Circles thinking that you have to compromise your beliefs, give a little, I'll give a little, you'll give a little, we'll come to the middle. It's not a negotiation. We're not going to start with ridiculous demands and let go of things that matter to us, because what matters to us is reducing the poverty rate by 10% and increasing the income of our circle leaders to above the 200% federal poverty line within 10 years. That's our goal. There doesn't need to be compromise or negotiation around those goals because they're very specific, very targeted, very clear, and that's where we're going to start. And we're going to do that by collaborating towards that shared end game, right? Whether you are a bootstraps or a benefits thinker, every single thought you have, every goal you have, every skill you have, every connection you have, every access to deciders in the world, any resource you have, we want to bring that to bear on solving this problem. And by doing that, coming together, sharing our strengths, mitigating our weaknesses, that's what's going to help us achieve those two goals of 10% and 200%. And when we do that, when we focus on those two things, there should be no time or energy left to argue inside circles. Again, there's lots of places outside circles you can go to argue if you want. But inside circles, we're just focusing on those two larger goals and then on the specific action steps of our circle leaders' personalized goals, not our own agendas. And in doing that, bootstraps, and benefits become bookends of brilliance. There's a lot of B's in that last part of the sentence, so I struggled a little bit there. I apologize. Alliteration always gets me. So in taking it outside, we want you to be a part of Circles if you're a bootstraps. And if you're a part of Circles and you're a bootstraps thinker, we want you to be bootstraps openly and authentically. If you're benefits, we want you to be openly and authentically a benefits person, but stay focused on the Circles end game. Debates that you want to have them, just have them somewhere else. Take it outside is something that you will hear us say inside Circles frequently. In Circles, we're busy pulling in the same directions, learning from one another, and moving the needles towards our shared end games. So what does that mean inside Circles, right? We're focused on those two end games, 200% of the federal poverty guideline, reduce poverty by 10%. Here to support the circle leaders and their families, right? Not to satisfy our need to be needed. Open to hearing new ideas, dedicated to seeing long-term economically stable results for families and communities, and committed to transparent and direct communication across socioeconomic lines to build transformative relationships. We make these commitments to each other. We're here to be helpful. We handle conflicts privately. We suspend our assumptions and allegations. We use dialogue to learn more. Right now, I'm doing a lot of not learning because I'm the only one talking, but that's the limitations. This is the limitations of the system. But I have a question on the Google Meet chat. So I will, yes, you can ask questions. It's 200% of the federal. Our goal is to raise 10% of the people living below the 200% of the federal poverty guidelines to above 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, and using that 200% number is important instead of just the 100%. In future Big View teams, we'll talk more about why 100%. Raising people above the 100% of federal poverty guidelines doesn't solve the problem. There are other factors at play that when someone gets above that level, support goes away, and it's very hard to stay above 100%. But if you make the goal 200%, you end up raising people. You can raise people out of poverty permanently instead of having sort of a yo-yo effect where people are in poverty above that 100% line. So the 200% is important. John says, yes, it does include children. The 3,000 people includes children. All right, I'll keep moving on, but I will answer other questions that come up. Oh, and look, the next slide does some of what I was just talking about. So again, I prepared this presentation in March, so you can't blame me too much for getting what's on the next slide. So hopefully that goes into a little more, Jim, about why the 200% of the earned income and the 10% reduction in poverty rates. And again, typically in other communities that have adopted Circles, Bootstraps thinkers tend to focus on the raising earned income, and benefits thinkers tend to focus on the 10% reduction, individual focus versus a societal focus. But don't feel like you have to box yourself into that one way of working on the problem. We're open to moving across all kinds of solutions. So one of the things that we want to make sure about anybody who's working in Circles and working to solve this poverty issue is to make sure that we are fact-finding instead of fault-finding. It's an important distinction. It's easy to find fault, unfortunately, right? Most of our common discourse is oriented around the idea of finding out whose fault this is. And instead, we want to make sure that we're finding fact. Like, why do these conditions exist? What are things that would help solve or remove the conditions or obstacles that are in the way of people who live in poverty? Learning from people who live in poverty about what those conditions are. That mindset of fact-finding, using private discussions when there's conflict, having a transparent shared end game instead of an agenda, asking questions to hear the response, not to just hear yourself speak, focusing on the content, intent, text, and context of the words, so that they retain their original meaning, take turns speaking, and seek to understand the view of others. The fault finding are the opposite of those dispositions, and we're going to try to avoid them in our circles work. So again, as a quick table discussion, or there are only about 25 of us or so spread across the multiple platforms right now. If you wanted to type in an answer to one of these questions or a larger question that you're thinking about, I would like to just talk through some of this and make sure that we all understand what we are working on in terms of the fact-finding mindset instead of that fault finding. How can fact-finding help Bootstraps thinkers and benefits thinkers work together? What will be the hardest commitment for you to make in holding a fact-finding mindset? And lastly, what assumptions and biases do you think you might hold that would be a roadblock to adopting a fact-finding mindset for this work? So pick one of those 4 questions, talk about it with the people around you, or type a question or a reflection into the Google Meet chat, and we will take a minute. Sarah, am I to wrap up at 6:30? Was that the goal? Okay. This is the last slide. Greg, can everybody see what's happening in the chat? Is that going out on the live stream, or should I read those out? Everybody can see it? Yeah, and Greg, thank you for sharing that idea. I think that's a critical thought process about fact finding. It helps us to discover issues that we didn't know about. You know, I have not lived in poverty since I was about 3. So I didn't really have much of a conscious understanding of what it was like for my years 1 through 3. So whenever I have the opportunity to talk to someone who has a different experience than me, I know that I discover issues that I might not know or be aware of. Thank you, Bev. Fact-finding is about understanding and seeking to understand by having dignity and respect for all of the people involved. Also an important mindset. And we are coming to the end of my time. So I believe I'm turning it back over to Sarah to wrap up. And thanks everybody for listening. And I hope that we have an opportunity to have a conversation in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Wow, awesome. All right, so we're going to come back to the large group. We are so grateful. Did that mute? All right, we are so grateful that you all were here with us tonight. Our circle leaders and allies in person, those of you online, thank you so much for being here. We want to remind you that tonight is the start of this conversation. This is not the end. This is just an introduction. Things are just getting going here, which is really exciting. We have the privilege of hearing and knowing our 9 circle leaders, and they share milestones each week with the group as they are working towards their circle's goals. And it is so inspiring. So we will continue to share some of those with you. Hopefully at some point you'll be able to be here with us in person and you can hear those as well. But the 3rd Monday in January will be our next Big View evening. So that is our plan to do this again and going forward from there. So like I said, this is the start of the conversation. Tonight, we'd invite you to tell everybody you know about Circles Sauk Prairie. Tell folks about what you heard tonight. Share the link. Tonight was recorded, so you can share the link with those who were not here so that they can hear what we're about here at Circles. and just continue to encourage and pray for our leaders and allies as we continue on this journey. It is not easy for all of us as we're working towards it, but it is so rewarding and so amazing. We are so proud of our leaders. They are amazing. And so we can't wait for you to be able to be here in person sometime and meet them as well. So thank you for being here tonight. We'll see you again at a Big View the third Monday in January. And we wish you a happy Thanksgiving and have a great night. God bless.